Hello and welcome back, future scientists. I'm Mr. K with Mississippi Public Broadcasting, and I have another great lesson today talking about the cell cycle. Now, last time I saw y'all, we talked about interphase. We're going to talk about that again today, but specifically we're going to focus on what is the DNA doing during interphase. There's a couple different things going on, and so I want to address that before we moved on to different parts of the cell cycle. So let's go ahead and hop into it and see what's going on here. Okay? Okay, so let's go ahead and get into this. So interphase, just as a reminder, a refresher, interphase is the period of growth and development. The cell's mostly just living its normal life, doing its daily functions, and it's going to get a little bit larger here too. Interphase is the longest part of the cell cycle, and as a reminder, some cells such as nerves and skeletal muscle cells remain in interphase indefinitely. Because they don't divide, some cells just stay in this part of the cell cycle, okay? So what's happening during interphase? Well, here's a couple of different things. The cell's going to increase in size, and it creates additional set of structures. We're going to make extra organelles because when we divide, each of those cells are going to need their own set of organelles. So we're going to go ahead and make those during this phase so that when the cell divides, each cell has exactly what it needs. We're also duplicating our DNA because same thing, each new cell is going to need its own set. So we have to duplicate it, make an extra copy so that when we divide, each cell has what it needs. The cell is going to produce structures required for division. So interphase is directly before mitosis. Mitosis is when the nucleus starts to divide, and so we get ready to divide. We're going to create structures that we need to divide, such as spindle fibers and centrioles, which we'll talk about in a little bit more detail later on, okay? Today I really wanted to talk about DNA though, okay? And as a reminder, DNA, it's an acronym and it actually stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. It's our hereditary material. It's inherited from our parents. You get half of your DNA from your mom and half of your DNA from your dad. It's why you kind of look like them, but DNA is also really important for the cells because DNA is kind of like the instructions. Cells know what to do because they have DNA that tells it what to do, okay? The DNA is in the nucleus of the cell, and that's very important. The DNA is safe in the nucleus, so we want to keep it there as much as we can. If it gets outside of the nucleus, it can be damaged, which would be really, really bad, okay? I wanted to kind of draw your attention to the last word of the second bullet. It says it is in the nucleus of our cells as chromatin. Okay, so chromatin is a form of DNA that we're not really used to talking about. When I tell people chromosomes, they usually think of that X shape, and you'll see some of them here today. But chromatin, DNA is mostly in the form of chromatin, and chromatin does not look like that X, those chromosomes. Chromatin is more like, imagine a bunch of yarn that is not tied up. Like if you just had a big bowl that was filled with yarn, that's kind of what chromatin is, okay? Before the cell divides, we have to replicate the DNA. And so what happens is, if you look at this last bullet point, to make it easier to divide, the chromatin is going to condense or coil into chromosomes. Now, why are we going to condense it into chromosomes? Let's go back to my yarn analogy. Imagine you had a big basket of yarn, and I said, hey, give me half of that. Well, that would be kind of hard. You'd have to pull all the yarn out, measure it, and then try to cut it in half and give me half of it. But if I had that yarn wound up into balls of yarn, it would be a lot easier just to count them and give me half and you keep the other half. So that's kind of what's happening in the cells. Most of the time the DNA is in a form of chromatin, but when we're getting ready to divide it, we coil it up really tight, and that makes it easier to divide. Okay, and so we're going to talk about that a little bit here today. So let's take a closer look at what's going on. Let's compare chromatin and chromosomes, okay? Look at the top picture here with the darker blue cell. You see how the lines in the middle there are just real, they don't look like anything, they just look like a long piece of string. That's what chromatin is. DNA is in this form the majority of its life. All through interphase, the DNA is in this form. Okay, so chromatin consists of DNA that is relaxed. It's in its uncoiled form. But as we're getting ready to divide, the chromatin is going to condense into something called chromosomes. And chromosomes, if you look at that bottom picture, you see those little axe-looking structures inside the cell. That's what chromosomes are, and that's what most people think of when we're talking about DNA. So chromosomes are DNA that is tightly coiled into structured strands. So what I really wanted to talk about here is the difference in between chromatin and chromosomes. They're both DNA, they're just in different forms. Chromatin, like in this picture here, it's relaxed, and it's just kind of like real, there's no form to it. It's like long pieces of string that are just all kind of wound together. Chromosomes, on the other hand, this is like, instead of just yarn, it's like balls of yarn. We take that yarn, we coil it up, and that's going to make it easier to divide later down the line, okay? Here's another look at it, okay? So what happens when we condense that DNA into chromosomes? This X picture on the left here is very iconic. When people talk about DNA, that's usually what they think of, okay? So what I wanted to address here is this is called a chromosome, and there's a couple different parts of it. So first, we can see that the chromosome is divided into a left half and a right half. Each half of the chromosome is called a chromatid, okay, with a D. Not chromatin with an N, but chromatid. I know the words sound really similar, but they are different. So each half of a chromosome is called a chromatid. Sometimes you'll even hear it called sister chromatids, because these different parts of the chromosomes are identical to each other. What happens is when this cell divides, the left side of this chromosome is going to go into one cell, and the right side of this chromosome is going to go into a different cell. So we want them perfectly identical. Okay, both sister chromatids are held in place by something called a centromere. Okay, centromeres hold the sister chromatids together. To me, that word is a little easy to remember compared to some of these other ones because it has the word center in it, right? And the centromere is right in the center of this chromosome. So again, when this cell divides, the left chromatid goes into one cell, the right chromatid goes into the different cell, and we want them identical so that those cells are getting the same information, okay? Okay, so humans have 46 chromosomes in every cell. This is what they look like, that kind of X shape. That's what they look like when they're dividing. But again, let's remember that the majority of the time, they don't look like this. During interphase, the chromosomes are actually in a form called chromatin. Okay, so I know a lot of these words are kind of confusing and they kind of all sound alike to one another. So what I wanted to do is I have a quick little review page that we're going to do together, and that's going to help us kind of wrap our head around this. So teacher, if you could, go ahead and pass out that sheet for today, that labeling page. Whenever everyone has one, y'all come back and unpause the video, and I'll fill it in with y'all as a review. Okay, so go ahead and pause the video, pass that out, and then when y'all are ready, come back to me, and I'll review it with y'all. All right, great. So you can see here I just have a couple of blanks I wanted to fill in with y'all. There's a little word box down at the bottom, so that'll make it easier for us to know what's going on. Let's label these, and that'll just help us kind of wrap our head around what's going on here. Okay, so let's start from left, and we'll kind of work our way over to the right. So this first box over here is just kind of pointing to the outer part of the cell. Y'all probably remember from other units that this is called the cell membrane. Okay. Cell membrane for this one, okay? So inside of the cell membrane, inside of eukaryotic cells, you're going to find something called the nucleus. So this next box up here is pointing to the nucleus, okay? Okay, now inside the nucleus, right now what we're seeing are chromosomes. Okay, so that means that this cell is getting ready to divide. Don't draw this, but I just kind of wanted to take a second to explain it. Most of the time, the DNA is actually in a form, let me draw another nucleus over here, okay? Most of the time, the DNA just kind of looks like this, okay? And remember that when it looks like this, it's actually called chromatin. It's in this form the majority of its life. Just kind of think of, I've been calling it yarn, but it's almost like a bowl of spaghetti too. That's kind of what it looks like. But when the cell gets ready to divide, we take that long uncoiled strands and we start to condense them into a different structure, and that makes it easier to divide. So here, what these arrows are pointing to, these are called chromosomes, okay? Chromosomes. Great. And then over here on the side, we have a couple of different parts of the chromosome. So what I want us to remember, that this top box on the far right is pointing to the right side, it's pointing to the left side. Chromosomes are made up of two identical structures, and those identical structures are called chromatids. Okay, chromatids. And sometimes you'll hear these called sister chromatids. The left side and the right side are supposed to be perfectly identical, okay? These sister chromatids are being held in place by a structure that's in the middle. To me, this one's easy to remember. It's called a centromere. Again, this one's a little easier to remember than some of the other ones because the centromere is in the center of the chromosome and it's holding them together. Now, if you take a closer look, this last one, this is actually just going to be DNA, okay? And what this is supposed to show us is DNA, this is not the structure of DNA. DNA, what's really going on is that it's being coiled up, it's being condensed. And so if you take a closer look at it, what you would actually see is more of this kind of structure. Chromosomes are made up of DNA, and so that's what that last little part is supposed to show, okay? Y'all did a great job today. Thank you so much for following along. Your teacher has some other assignments for you to work on, so let's make sure to give that your best effort, and I hope everybody has a great day.